Chapter 30. History. Sky turned pink as Trisha's gaze bounced from her to the coals and back again. Sky's color increased when her cousin-in-law wiggled her copper-colored eyebrows. Sky lowered her head, letting her dark hair cover her face, and twisted to scrape a wood chair away from the table and sit. "Well," Trisha said, "that's interesting." Still not looking at Trisha, Sky gave a shake of her head. Trisha took a moment to add the cookie ingredients to the cream-colored ceramic mixing bowl. There was the sharp crack as she knocked the hard-shelled eggs against the bowl, adding them, one by one, to the butter and sugar. "So, you pick one out yet?" Trisha nodded toward the men. "Trisha." "As if," Sky stuttered, barely getting the words out. "As if you've been able to choose?" Trisha couldn't help the giggle that escaped her. "No. As if I've been thinking about that with everything else happening around us." Sky glanced at Dylan, who was sitting on the overstuffed couch in the living room, and Trisha saw her. "Oh, please, girl," Trisha said. "You gonna try and tell me you didn't notice that handsome face, those brawny arms and shoulders? I mean, look at those shoulders. No wonder he took the couch, he can't fit anywhere else. Really hasn't even crossed your mind, huh?" Sky's gaze followed Trisha's, tracing Dylan from head to toe, until Dylan glanced at her. Like a schoolgirl, she quickly turned away and shielded her face with her hand. "Trisha. He saw us." Trisha smiled. "Dylan, huh? Good choice. Good man. It doesn't matter. This isn't the time for us to act like 16-year-old girls. It's time to act like adults. Well, in case you haven't noticed, us adults like a little of that fun too." Sky waved Trisha away. "Oh, for heaven's sake, can we just change the subject?" Trisha was having too much fun torturing her with this information. While Trisha indicated Sky could do whatever she wanted, her pleased expression showed she was as happy as a cat over a bowl of cream since figuring out Sky's secret. "Anyhow," Sky said, relieved to broach a new subject, "everything's going well." "I see that." Trisha nodded with a sly smile on her face. Sky ignored her insinuation and continued. "Wade and Dylan are teaching Jesse and I some self-defense and survival techniques. We didn't get a lot done yet, but we're learning." "So you mentioned, and it's just too much." Trisha gave Sky a double take, her eyes wide. "You taking survival skills classes? Like what? Are you taking down forest animals, skinning them? You little Miss Manny?" Trisha threw an apologetic look at Sky as she chuckled. "Don't laugh." Sky looked at her hands with a wry smile. Where once a shiny new manicure had graced her nails, she now saw damage that would make her nail tech shudder. A small bit of color clung to a few, and she scraped at it. Sky had to admit she would have laughed just as hard as Trisha if someone said, even a month ago, what she'd be doing now. Once they got themselves under control, Sky continued, "No, we aren't hunting yet, though Dylan has threatened it, but I've learned more about fishing. I do okay. Well, I caught a few fish, anyway." Pride tinged her voice as she remembered her last expedition. "We learn to watch for what's going on, listen for anything unusual, use what's around us. You know, things that will help keep us alive. We also reviewed what to scavenge from the neighborhood and to be careful while doing it. You can't just barge into a place. So all that kind of stuff." Trisha brought a hand to her face. "You're serious?" "Yes, I'm serious. The other life no longer exists, and if I want to survive in this new one, I need to change. No more high heels and manicures. Well, maybe sometimes, occasionally." Sky couldn't imagine never having a moment to pamper herself, or wear her favorite red heels, but couldn't rule it out either. "But not often, it's time to be practical now. I have to keep Jesse and me alive." I was so extremely unprepared for this, I knew nothing, and I still don't, but the Coles took us in, and they are good, patient teachers. Trisha leaned on the counter and crossed her arms. Huh, who woulda guessed? Them boys are turning you back into a mountain girl. Trisha raised her voice so her husband would hear. Tom, I want to learn survival skills. Tom had been in the middle of his own story. He paused, a perplexed expression on his face, and said, "Okay, honey." He chuckled before he continued on. Trisha turned back to her friend. I'm glad you're settled in, but Sky, you coulda stayed here. Oh, I know. It was just a chain of events. The infected came through, and I left in a hurry. I thought everyone was leaving. After I got Jesse it was dark, and we ended up at the Coles cabin. I really only expected to be there overnight before going to Dad's, but things changed. In the meantime, we have. I don't know, we've become something. I guess I'm not sure what yet. Jesse needs Dylan and Wade right now because they give him something I can't. They get what he's gone through and make him feel more normal in a way I'm not able. For his sake, at least, we need to stay together longer. But Trisha, Sky entreated, you should come to Coles Mountain. It's so nice there. You can almost forget about all this. There are empty cabins right next to ours. I'm sure that Wade and Dylan could use more help to do all the, man stuff. Trisha laughed as she rose to take out a batch of cookies and put another one in the oven. I thought you were learning all the man stuff. I'm not stupid. I'm still gonna let them make use of their own skills. And before you get all snooty about that, you better believe they are using my skills too. I've never baked so many cookies in all my life. I, admittedly, have few skills they actually need. Sky laughed. Hence, the lessons. Trisha eyed Sky. I'm sure you're helping them more than you realize. Yes, I have to say my therapist skills are coming in handy. Trisha laughed. I bet. Sky walked to the counter, pinched a bit of cookie dough and popped it in her mouth. Oh, yum. The sweet smell of warm cookies filled the air as she washed her hands in the sink. Trisha, please think about coming up to the mountain. Emotion played over Trisha's face as she glanced around her house. It would be hard for her to leave her house unprotected. Sky saw Wade bristle and stare at the other men. None of them seemed at ease. Trisha, what's going on between them? Trisha looked down and shook her head. History. Sky tilted her head. What can you tell me? Trisha sighed and threw a glance at Tom before lowering her voice. Look, if they say anything, I didn't say a word. She peeked again into the living room, then told Sky, they all grew up together, great friends, inseparable. But it wasn't 3 boys then. It was 4. Trisha choked up for a moment, then cleared her throat. There was also a boy named Mark. Great guy, the kind of guy us other kids kinda looked up to. Of the 4, Dylan and he was the closest. Once they hit their early teens, they started cutting up. Not anything real bad, but drinkin' when they got their hands on it, pranks. Boy stuff. Trisha looked away and sighed. One day, they were drinkin' while they were cleaning their guns. Wade and Dylan got into a fight over the weapon. They weren't aware, but the gun was still loaded. It went off. Mark caught it, right in the chest. Sky paled as she raised her hand to her mouth. Tears shone in Trisha's eyes. Mark didn't die right away. Course they weren't all that close to Doc's, but they drug him all the way there. I saw them come into town. Mark still gasping his last ragged breaths. His blood soaking their clothes. I don't know how he lasted as long as he did. Trisha ran a hand along her cheek. I'll never forget the raspy sound of his breathing. The sheer confusion and panic on Dylan, Wade and Tom's faces as they watched their friend die. We all felt so useless, there was nothing to be done. Those boys laid him right on the sidewalk and fell down beside him. Tears flooded Sky's eyes as she listened to Trish's story. They lay there, gasping and crying. Their arms around him and each other. They stayed like that for a long time, like if no one moved, then no one died, and life would go on as it did before. Tom's dad and some deputies had to drag them away from Mark, kickin' and screamin', especially Dylan. A tear fell from Sky's face, splashing on her arm. Sky remembered what Dylan had said yesterday. This is what he meant. He did understand what it was to kill someone. He'd killed his best friend. Trisha went on. For a long spell, the boys weren't themselves. Tom and Wade were devastated, but Dylan blamed himself. He was like a ghost, here but not here. Soon after that, the Cole's mom died. Dylan just seemed so broken. Sky's friend shook her head. Wade and Dylan got pretty wild after that, and Tom wasn't allowed to hang out with them anymore. By then they'd started living in the woods. They came to school enough to pass, but they became wild in a different way. Sky slowly closed her eyes. As if their abuse hadn't been enough. Had these men gotten one break in life? Ever? Her eyes sought Jesse. If she hadn't rescued him, his life would have turned out the same. Her eyes drifted to Dylan. And the shooting? They weren't charged? Trisha shook her head. Ruled accidental. Tom's dad took care of the legal end. Everyone was aware of what happened, but no one who'd seen the boys that day would have reckoned they could be punished any more than they already were. Trisha tipped her head toward the living room. You asked me what's between them? I don't think they blame each other, but I reckon they're not healed yet. It's like Mark is sitting there with them, reminding them of who they're missing. Sky scanned the men in the other room and noticed Dylan nodding her way. She turned her head to wipe at the stray tears on her cheeks before stepping into the living room and raising an eyebrow at Dylan. Tom's gonna fill us in on what's been going on around here, he said. Reckoned you'd want to hear it. Sky's shoulders tensed as she settled into a green overstuffed chair. She wasn't sure she did.